as Louise has been saying, MPs back here this morning after that historic judgment which said proroguing Parliament never really happened. What Boris Johnson chose to do a couple of weeks ago was unlawful, so come back and crack on with work. But what do they do now? Here to explain are Joelle Grogan, who's a lecturer in constitutional law, and Maddy Thimont Jack, who's from the independent think tank, the Institute for Government. Thanks both of you. Feels like we're on some horrible camping holiday, doesn't it, in our little tent. Joelle, let's talk to you to start with. We hear that Jacob Rees-Mogg described this decision by the Supreme Court yesterday as a constitutional coup. Is he right?
That's a bit unusual a statement, but very simply what happened yesterday was the Supreme Court doing their job to tell Parliament to do their job and to also say that government powers are limited in their job. We don't really have a constitutional coup when we have the court, the Supreme Court, saying in a unanimous judgment of 11 judges, here are two foundational principles of our legal system: parliamentary sovereignty and parliamentary accountability. That's not constitutional coup, that's constitutional fact.
So what does this change then? Not just with Brexit, not just now, but in the years, decades to come?
This is the biggest statement, I think, of constitutional law in the country that we've had, almost even bigger, I'd say, than the Miller decision 3 years ago. We have a very clear statement of the court saying, first, where there are legal powers of government, they are limited, that they're not unfettered, they cannot be used for any purpose, and that these legal powers do and can be supervised by the courts, and that the courts will look at them and say, do you have reasonable justification for this, where you have powers that can frustrate or undermine or stop the democratic will of Parliament?
Maddy, MPs come back then, proroguing never happened, they get on with business. What are they going to do with this extra time?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, looking at the order paper today, the answer is not very much at this stage. The order paper is pretty much empty. Because there hasn't been time to give notice, we're not having Prime Minister's questions as we'd expect. There's sort of basically an option for MPs to have urgent questions or emergency debates, but today not very much. Going forward, it's a bit more uncertain. So from the Prime Minister's perspective, we know that he still wants to have an early election. He might try again to hold a vote on that. Expect him to be unsuccessful. There's also a suggestion that they might try and hold a vote on having a very short recess for Conservative Party conference. In terms of what backbenchers are going to do, I mean, firstly, while they were prorogued, the government published its Yellowhammer document, so that's the sort of contingency planning for no deal. So we can imagine now that MPs can actually ask follow-up questions, they can scrutinise that with government ministers. We also, Johnson sort of prorogued Parliament before he had to appear before the liaison committee, so that's the committee that has all the chairs of all the select committees in the House of Commons. So we can expect also that they're going to expect a session with him very shortly.
So they've got stuff to get their teeth into. But in terms of Brexit and where we go, what happens with Brexit, it's hard to see really how anything has really changed despite that momentous decision in the court.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I actually agree. I don't think much has changed. You know, they passed the bill that they wanted to pass to try and take no deal off the table on the 31st of October before prorogation, and arguably his decision to prorogue might have actually helped speed that bill through Parliament. So we know that they're trying to stop no deal on the 31st of October. Johnson still wants to try and get a deal, so he doesn't have to ask for an extension, so that's still going to be ongoing. So really, I think the biggest thing that Parliament can do is scrutinise what the government is doing, both for preparing for no deal and for negotiations. It'll be interesting to see whether they are concerned by some of what Johnson's been saying about the fact that he thinks there are loopholes in the Benn Act, and whether they do try and legislate to sort of shore it up, but we're going to have to wait and see.
This is the act that would stop him having a no deal, that he'd have to come back to Parliament and extend.
Exactly. So Johnson sort of consistently said he will refuse to ask for an extension. There's been a suggestion he knows how he'll get round it. MPs might try and take some steps to try and sort of legislate again to try and shore up the Benn Act, but we don't know really at this stage.
OK, thank you both very much indeed.